The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The walls, white and cold, seemed to close in on Tasha Ford as she sat quietly in the defendant's chair. The buzz of murmurs filled the room, but all she could focus on was the pounding of her heart. Her palms were sweaty, but her face was an impenetrable mask of calm. She was used to intense situations, used to keeping her emotions in check. After all, she had been trained to do so. But today was different. Today the stakes were higher than any mission she had ever been on. Today her entire life, her freedom, her reputation was on the line. "Order in the court," the judge's voice snapped through the room, cutting the rising chatter. Judge Matthews was a seasoned man in his 50s, known for his stern demeanor and no-nonsense approach. Tasha didn't know if he had already made up his mind, but she could feel the weight of his gaze upon her. Across the room, Officer Ethan Grant stood with a smug expression, the very embodiment of authority. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor unwavering, and his eyes, cold and calculated, never once flickered toward her. To the untrained eye, he was the perfect picture of justice. But Tasha knew better. Officer Grant had falsely accused her of a crime she didn't commit. A robbery gone wrong, they said. Her name had been dragged through the mud in front of the entire city, but none of them knew the truth. They didn't. "So know who she really was. This is all just a misunderstanding," Tasha had whispered to her lawyer earlier, Ava Daniels. "I'll prove it, but not the way they expect." Ava nodded, her eyes locked on Tasha, a silent promise of support. "Stay calm. We've got this." The prosecution began its case, and Officer Grant's voice filled the room with accusations. His words painted her as a criminal, cold, calculated, dangerous. He spoke of the evidence he claimed to have found, the supposed security footage, the fingerprints, the eyewitness testimonies. Each piece fell into place with alarming ease. It was a well-orchestrated narrative, but it was a lie. Tasha's mind raced. She had trained for years to read people, to understand the lies they told and the truths they buried. And as she watched Officer Grant speak, she could see it in his eyes. There was something more to this than just a simple mistake. He wasn't accusing her because he thought she was guilty. No, he was accusing her because he had something to hide. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor continued, "we have irrefutable evidence that proves the defendant, Tasha Ford, is responsible for this crime." Tasha's throat tightened, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. But soon she would. She had to be patient. Let them think they had won. Let them believe she was just another person they could crush under the weight of their power. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Tasha Ford wasn't just some random woman accused of a crime. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the best. A woman who had stared death in the face and laughed. A woman who had been trained to handle the worst situations imaginable, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially not Officer Ethan Grant, define her. Her fingers clenched into fists, but her expression remained as still as stone. The jury seemed to be absorbing every word the prosecutor said. Tasha could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her focus straight ahead, her gaze never wavering. She wasn't just fighting for her innocence in that room. She was fighting for her life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Tasha Ford was no stranger to adversity. Born in a small town in the South, her childhood was a far cry from the polished courtroom she sat in today. Growing up with a single mother, Marilyn Ford, Tasha learned early that life wasn't going to hand her anything. There was no silver spoon, no privilege to rely on. The world, especially for a young black girl, would be filled with obstacles. Tasha's earliest memories were of her mother working tirelessly at 2 jobs, coming home late, exhausted but always smiling. Marilyn was the embodiment of strength, a woman who had seen the worst but never let it break her. She was tough, determined, and above all, loving. But the world was unforgiving, and it often made Tasha feel like she had to fight just to be seen. In school, Tasha quickly became aware of how differently she was treated. Even as a child, she could sense the quiet judgment of her classmates. She was either too loud, too outspoken, or simply too different. But her mother always told her the same thing. "You're not here to fit in, Tasha. You're here to stand out." And stand out she did. At the age of 16, Tasha joined a local track team. It wasn't just about sports for her, it was about proving something. Proving to herself and to everyone around her that she was capable of greatness. By the time she was 18, she had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, but her road to success wasn't going to be easy. Even in college, she faced obstacles that tested her resolve. In one instance, she had to fight for a spot in an elite athletic program, a spot that many people believed should have gone to someone else. But she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. After months of grueling training, she earned the recognition she deserved. But the challenges continued. At times it felt like no matter how hard she worked, people were always judging her for things that had nothing to do with her abilities, her skin color, her gender, and the fact that she wasn't the typical candidate for a military career. But Tasha wasn't about to let those things hold her back. By the time she graduated, she had made a decision that would forever change the trajectory of her life. She was going to enlist in the Navy. Her decision was met with mixed reactions. Marilyn was proud but worried, like any mother would be. She had always wanted her daughter to have a better life, but sending her off to fight wars didn't exactly fit into that vision. "You sure about this, Tasha?" Marilyn asked when her daughter told her of the decision. "The world's tough enough as it is for us. But you've always known what you wanted. Just don't forget where you came from." Tasha held her mother's hand and nodded. "I won't, Mum. I won't forget." Her mother's words echoed in her mind as she boarded the bus to basic training. The training was brutal, but Tasha thrived under the pressure. Each obstacle only fueled her determination. She wasn't just trying to be a part of something. She was working toward a goal she had dreamed about since she was a teenager. The Navy was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The physical and mental tests pushed her to her limits, but it was in the toughest moments that Tasha realized who she was. The woman who had grown up in the shadow of adversity had now become a force to be reckoned with. She wasn't just another recruit. She was a Navy SEAL, and she would stop at nothing to prove that she belonged there. In the SEALs, Tasha had to fight for every inch. She trained for months, running, swimming, carrying heavy loads, and enduring conditions most people would have given up on. And yet Tasha never wavered. She became one of the best, earning respect from her peers and superior officers alike. It was here that Tasha truly learned what it meant to fight, not just for recognition or victory, but for something deeper. She had become a part of a brotherhood, a group of men and women who understood the meaning of sacrifice, loyalty, and perseverance. But the SEALs weren't just about combat and strength. They taught her the value of silence and restraint, the ability to hold your ground even when the world is trying to knock you down. The military instilled in her an unshakable discipline and a deep belief in the importance of honor. Her time as a Navy SEAL had given her a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. It was the one place where she felt she truly belonged, despite all the barriers that had been placed in her path. However, no one in this courtroom today knew that. No one knew the warrior sitting before them. No one knew that beneath the quiet exterior, Tasha Ford was a woman forged in the fires of adversity and battle. And that made her dangerous, not because of the weapon in her hand, but because of the strength in her heart. As the prosecutor continued to outline the charges, Tasha couldn't help but think of the battles she had already fought and won, battles that had shaped her into the woman she was today. This courtroom battle was no different. The lies they were telling about her, she would tear them apart, piece by piece, just as she had done so many times before. Tasha leaned forward, her mind focused. It was time to take control of this narrative. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The courtroom was almost suffocating now. The sharp clink of the gavel, the rustling of paper, and the murmurs from the gallery all seemed distant. Tasha's focus was razor sharp, locked onto the man who had put her here, Officer Ethan Grant. He stood across the room, his back straight, his uniform pristine. To the outside world, he looked like a man of integrity. But Tasha knew better. The accusation against her was clear. She was being blamed for a violent robbery that had occurred just weeks ago, a well-coordinated heist involving the theft of millions in cash and jewelry from a downtown vault. The problem was, none of the evidence tied her to the scene, at least not in any way that made sense. But the more the prosecutor spoke, the more Tasha realized this wasn't just about a robbery. Officer Grant wasn't just trying to put her behind bars, he was trying to destroy her. On the night of March 12th, the defendant was seen near the location of the crime, the prosecutor declared, his voice booming in the otherwise silent courtroom. Multiple eyewitnesses have identified Ms. Ford as one of the robbers. Tasha's stomach churned. She knew what the prosecution was trying to do. They had built a perfect narrative, one that could convince anyone she was guilty. But she wasn't. Afraid. Not because she was innocent, she knew she was, but because she had been through far worse. Being falsely accused was the least of her problems. The prosecutor presented the evidence, shaky CCTV footage from a nearby convenience store showing a woman who looked vaguely similar to Tasha. A blurred figure, wearing a hoodie, moving swiftly and purposefully down the alley. The woman was a few inches shorter, but the image was enough to create doubt. Tasha's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. The footage was flimsy. It didn't prove anything. But the way Officer Grant stood beside it, with his quiet confidence, made it seem like it did. Officer Grant, the prosecutor continued, has testified that he was the one to discover Ms. Ford's vehicle parked near the crime scene. When approached, she fled the area. He turned toward Tasha with a glance that sent a chill through her. And when officers apprehended her, she was found with stolen items. Tasha's heart raced, but she didn't show it. She was calm. Too calm. Grant had twisted the facts just like she knew he would. He made it sound like she had been caught red-handed. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that she had been at a late-night training exercise deep in the woods with several of her SEAL team members. Her car had been parked there as a precaution, a safety measure, nothing more. But of course no one would believe that, not unless they knew who she really was. It wasn't just the false evidence that bothered Tasha. It was the intent behind it. Grant wasn't just out to win a case, he was out to ruin her. The way he looked at her, his eyes full of disdain, like she was nothing more than a pawn in his game, made her blood boil. He wanted to take everything from her, her career, her dignity, her future. And for what? Because she had made a mistake. In trusting the wrong people? Tasha Ford is guilty, Your Honor, Officer Grant had said earlier, his voice ringing with certainty. She is no hero. She's just a criminal hiding behind a badge. That stung. The words hit her like a slap in the face. Grant didn't know her. He didn't know the sacrifices she had made, the missions she had completed, or the lives she had saved. She wasn't some hardened criminal. She was a fighter, a woman who had spent years serving her country. She had been a warrior in battlefields, far more dangerous than this courtroom. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was a game of words, and in the courtroom, words could be as deadly as any weapon. As the prosecutor droned on, Tasha's mind raced. She needed a way out. She couldn't let this lie stand, couldn't let Grant destroy everything she had worked so hard for. There was no way she could sit back and allow this twisted version of events to take root. She had to act. It was then that she remembered something, the one thing that would give her the leverage she needed. She had a weapon of her own, a truth, the truth that could shatter everything. But it was a truth she had never revealed to anyone. Not here, not now, not unless she was ready for the full consequences. The thought of it was terrifying. If she revealed who she truly was, the Navy would be pulled into the chaos. It could lead to an investigation that could undo everything she had worked for. Her reputation, her career, everything would be exposed. And yet, it might be the only thing that could clear her name. Tasha looked over at Ava Daniels, her defense attorney, who had been sitting quietly beside her. Ava caught her gaze, offering a brief, reassuring nod. Tasha wasn't sure if Ava understood what she was thinking, but it didn't matter. This was her fight, and only she could decide how to win it. The courtroom went silent for a moment as the prosecutor paused, waiting for a response from Tasha's defense team. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tasha said, her voice steady and calm, though it was hard to ignore the fire burning within her. "I have something to say." All eyes turned to her. The room seemed to hold its breath. Tasha stood up, her back straight, and for the first time since the trial had started, she allowed herself to truly look at Officer Grant. She knew it would be the last time she ever saw him as the man he was now. He was about to lose everything. She wasn't going to be the victim in this story. She was going to be the hero. The air in the courtroom seemed to freeze. Tasha's words hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. Everyone had been waiting for the defense to respond, to offer some shred of doubt, some argument that might weaken the case against her. But Tasha wasn't interested in doubt. She was ready to drop a bombshell. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she took a deep breath. She knew what was coming. The truth, her truth, would change everything. There was no turning back now. She wasn't going to play the victim in this story. She was going to take control. "Your Honor," Tasha's voice was clear, steady. "I am not just any woman. I am a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite operatives in the world, and I did not commit this crime." The room fell into complete silence. Even the prosecutor paused, his hand still poised over his paperwork. The jury exchanged glances, some of them visibly startled. Tasha could feel all eyes on her, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. But she wasn't going to back down. She had nothing left to lose. The judge, Judge Matthews, blinked in surprise. "Ms. Ford," he began slowly, his voice wary but curious. "You are claiming to be a Navy SEAL?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, sir. I've served in multiple high-stakes operations across the globe. And if you want to know the truth of why I was at that crime scene, it's because I was running an operation of my own, an undercover mission to uncover a trafficking ring." There it was, the truth she had kept hidden for so long. It wasn't just about defending herself from the accusations. It was about revealing a side of her life that few knew, a side that, if exposed, could ruin her entire career. But she had no choice. She had to fight back with everything she had. "This case," Tasha continued, "is not about me being a criminal. It's about someone trying to frame me, someone who wants to protect a dangerous operation, and I'm going to prove it." The judge's expression softened, but his gaze remained skeptical. "And how do you propose to prove this, Ms. Ford?" Tasha felt the weight of the courtroom's gaze on her. She was treading on dangerous ground. If she wasn't careful, revealing her connection to the Navy SEALs could destroy everything she had worked for. But in that moment she realized something important. She wasn't here to protect her career anymore. She was here to protect herself, and the truth. She turned toward Ava Daniels, her lawyer, who had been listening intently. Ava had a mixture of shock and disbelief on her face, but there was no turning back now. Ava gave a subtle nod, signaling that Tasha had the go-ahead to continue. "I will bring in witnesses, evidence, and my own team to prove that I was never part of this robbery," Tasha said, her voice steady. "But more than that, I will expose Officer Grant's role in all of this." A murmur of confusion ran through the courtroom. Everyone was trying to process what she had just said. The prosecution seemed taken aback, unsure of how to respond. Officer Grant's face twisted into a mask of disbelief, but underneath the shock, Tasha could see the flicker of something else, fear. Tasha didn't look away from him. "Officer Grant," she continued, "you know exactly what I'm talking about. You think you can get away with framing me, but you're wrong. I've seen your face before, during one of my missions." A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Officer Grant's jaw clenched, and his eyes darted toward the judge, then quickly back to Tasha. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interjected, his voice sharp, "this is preposterous. Ms. Ford is trying to divert attention from the clear evidence against her." Tasha didn't flinch. She knew what she was up against. The prosecution was trying to pull the rug out from under her, but she wasn't going to let them. "No, this is not a diversion. This is the truth." The judge's gavel came, down sharply, cutting through the rising tension. "Order. Ms. Ford, I want you to clarify your claims before we proceed." Tasha turned to face the judge, her heart racing. "I am claiming that Officer Grant has been involved in a criminal enterprise. He has ties to an underground network that I have been investigating as part of my military duties. This robbery, it's a cover-up, and I was there to stop it." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was deafening. Then Ava spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, Ms. Ford is telling the truth. She's been serving this country honorably for years, and this accusation is nothing more than an attempt to destroy her reputation." Tasha took a deep breath, then faced Officer Grant again. This was it. He was no longer just a man in a uniform. He was the villain in her story, and he was going to lose. Tasha's fingers tightened on the armrest once more, her resolve unwavering. This was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The courtroom was alive with whispers. The entire dynamic had shifted. The jury was no longer looking at Tasha as the accused. Now they were looking at her as a woman who might have been set up by someone more powerful than they had imagined. And Tasha knew one thing. She wasn't. Leaving this courtroom as the guilty party, the courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations, the atmosphere charged with tension. Tasha had just thrown a grenade into the proceedings, and the fallout was already starting. Officer Grant, who had been so poised and confident just moments ago, now seemed like a man trying to hold together a crumbling facade. His carefully constructed image of integrity was cracking, and he knew it. The judge, Judge Matthews, leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Ms. Ford," he said, his voice carrying an edge of warning, "this is a serious accusation you've made. If you're suggesting that Officer Grant has been involved in criminal activities, I will need solid evidence before we can proceed further." Tasha nodded, knowing the gravity of her words. She hadn't come here to make baseless accusations. She wasn't interested in causing a spectacle. She was interested in the truth. And she was ready to reveal it no matter the cost. She could feel Ava's hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. Ava, her defense attorney, had been calm and collected throughout this ordeal, but even she was taken aback by the audacity of Tasha's revelation. It was risky, so risky, but sometimes the only way to fight back was to put everything on the table. "Your Honor," Tasha began, her voice steady as she addressed the judge, "I'm prepared to present evidence, not just words. I have access to intelligence that can prove Officer Grant's involvement in an illegal network, one that connects to organized crime and corrupt law enforcement officers. My team can testify to this, and I can prove that I was there to stop it." There was a collective intake of breath in the room, as if everyone had been holding their breath in anticipation. Even Officer Grant's face had shifted. His confidence was slipping, replaced by a flicker of fear that he couldn't hide. His eyes darted between the judge, the prosecutor, and Tasha, his jaw tightening as if he was trying to suppress an emotional outburst. "I don't believe you, Ms. Ford," the prosecutor snapped, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "You can't just come in here and claim to be a Navy SEAL without proving it. You expect this court to believe that you're some sort of undercover agent who was involved in stopping an organized crime ring. Where's your proof? What's your evidence?" Tasha's eyes never left the prosecutor, her gaze unwavering. She knew what she was up against. The prosecutor was throwing everything he could at her, trying to discredit her, but it wouldn't work. She was prepared for this. She had to be. "I understand the skepticism," Tasha said, her tone unwavering. "But this isn't just about me. It's about a larger conspiracy, and I can provide the names, the locations, and even the recordings that link Officer Grant to the very criminal network I've been investigating. This isn't a coincidence, Your Honor. This is a setup, and I'm not going to let an innocent woman take the fall for it." A tense silence filled the room. The judge was processing her words, his brow furrowing as he considered the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Ford," he said after a moment, his voice more measured, "I am going to allow you to submit whatever evidence you have. However, I want you to understand the consequences if you cannot back up these claims. False accusations of this nature could result in serious legal repercussions for you. Are you prepared to take that risk?" Tasha didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm prepared to take that risk. The truth is worth it." The room fell silent again as the weight of her statement sank in. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a battle for her freedom, for her honor, and for everything she had worked for in the Navy. She had risked everything to serve her country, and now she was willing to risk it all again to clear her name. Ava leaned in close, whispering to Tasha, "Are you sure about this? You're going to be putting your entire career on the line. Once you reveal this, there's no going back." Tasha met her lawyer's eyes and nodded, the determination in her expression clear. "I have to. If I don't, I'll lose everything anyway. And I didn't come this far just to give up." The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "Very well," he said finally, breaking the tension. "We will adjourn for the day. Ms. Ford will present her evidence tomorrow. Court is dismissed until then." The gavel came down, signaling the end of the day's proceedings. But for Tasha, the battle had only just begun. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. She had exposed herself to scrutiny in a way that could have catastrophic consequences. But for once in her life, she wasn't going to back down as Tasha stood, the weight of the situation settled in. She had been holding her breath for so long it almost felt like she could finally exhale. But just as she was about to walk toward Ava, she felt a hand on her arm. It was Officer Grant. He had approached her, his face twisted in anger. "You think you can just walk in here and destroy me?" he hissed, his voice low, barely a whisper. "You have no idea what you're up against. You're playing a dangerous game. Ford, you don't want to make an enemy of me." Tasha didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression cold and unyielding. "You made your choice the moment you decided to frame me," she said, her voice sharp. "This is your doing, not mine." Grant's eyes darkened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing. In the silence that followed, Tasha didn't watch him leave. She was focused on the path ahead. Tomorrow she would present her evidence. Tomorrow she would prove her innocence, or at least expose the truth. She didn't know what the fallout would be, but she was ready to face it. The real battle was about to begin. And Tasha Ford wasn't about to lose. The next day arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The courtroom was filled with murmurs and whispers, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Tasha had prepared herself for this moment for weeks. No, for years. But now that it was here, she couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Today wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about exposing a dangerous conspiracy, about revealing the darkness lurking beneath the surface of the people who were supposed to protect and serve. As she stood at the defense table, her hands steady but her mind racing, she stole a glance at Ava, who was reviewing her notes. Ava met her gaze, offering a small but reassuring smile. "You've got this," she whispered. Tasha nodded. She had no other choice. There was no turning back. The judge entered the courtroom, followed by the prosecutor and the other players in this high-stakes drama. Judge Matthews took his seat, his stern expression betraying none of the anticipation that was clearly simmering in the air. He called the session to order. "We are here today for the presentation of evidence by the defendant, Ms. Tasha Ford," Judge Matthews said, his voice authoritative. "Ms. Ford, you have made some very serious claims. I expect that you will provide the necessary evidence to back up those claims." Tasha stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm ready to present the evidence that proves Officer Grant's involvement in a criminal enterprise." The prosecutor, Daniel Harris, glared at her, his eyes full of contempt. "This is outrageous. You're going to bring in fabricated evidence to try to save yourself. It's clear that you're only trying to confuse the jury," he sneered, but his voice held a touch of uncertainty now. Tasha didn't flinch. She knew what was coming next. Ava rose to her feet and approached the judge. "Your Honor, we have multiple pieces of evidence that will not only prove Ms. Ford's innocence, but also expose the truth behind Officer Grant's actions. We are prepared to call on witnesses, show surveillance footage, and provide audio recordings that will corroborate everything Ms. Ford has claimed." The room went silent. Even the prosecutor seemed taken aback by the sheer scale of what was being proposed. He was used to quick victories, to cornering the accused with their own lies, but this was something different. Tasha's heart raced as she prepared to take the stand. "If I may, Your Honor, I would like to begin by showing the court the first piece of evidence," she said, her voice clear and confident. "This is a recording from one of my operations that took place several months ago, which includes conversations between Officer Grant and several known criminal figures." A technician at the back of the courtroom began setting up the audio equipment. The room fell into a tense silence as the whir of machinery echoed through the space. Tasha's eyes never left Officer Grant, who was trying to remain calm, but couldn't mask the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. She could almost feel the shift in the air as the first words of the recording played through the speakers. The voice that came through the speakers was unmistakable. Grant's voice, low and full of authority. "You've got to move fast or we're going to lose everything. The shipment comes through tonight. Make sure the cops stay out of it. I'll handle the rest," the recording said. The words hit like a punch in the gut. Grant had been speaking to a known criminal associate. The connection between him and the criminal network was undeniable. Tasha glanced over at the jury. They were silent, their faces a mixture of confusion, shock, and suspicion. She could tell that the truth was beginning to take hold. "Your Honor," Tasha said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency, "this is just the beginning. This conversation is evidence of a larger operation, one that Officer Grant is clearly involved in. And this isn't the only piece of evidence." Ava moved forward, gesturing for the technician to play the next part of the recording. The next clip was a conversation from the night of the robbery. The voices were clearer, the context chilling. Tasha's stomach churned as she heard Officer Grant's voice once again. "I told you we need to make sure Ford gets blamed for this. She's been snooping around too much, asking the wrong questions. If she goes down for this, we're in the clear." The room erupted in an almost tangible wave of shock. It was clear. Now, the pieces were falling into place. Officer Grant wasn't just trying to frame her. He had orchestrated the entire robbery to cover up something far more sinister. The robbery had been staged. She had been set up from the start. "You see, Your Honor," Tasha said, her voice firm and unwavering, "Officer Grant didn't just arrest me because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He set me up because I was getting too close to his operation. The robbery was his way of covering his tracks, and I was his scapegoat." Grant was visibly shaken now, his face a mask of fury and fear. He clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of the table. But he said nothing. He couldn't. The evidence was staring him in. The face, and he knew it. Judge Matthews leaned forward, his eyes locked on Grant. "Officer Grant, is there anything you wish to say in response to this?" Grant's silence spoke volumes. He was a man cornered with no way out. Tasha turned back to the jury, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had revealed the truth, and she had the evidence to back it up. Now it was out of her hands. The rest was up to them. The prosecutor stood up, attempting to regain control of the situation, but even he seemed unsure of what to do next. "Your Honor," he said, his voice shaky, "this is outrageous. This evidence is fabricated, and these claims are baseless. Ms. Ford is simply trying to discredit a decorated officer." But no one in the courtroom seemed to be buying it. The weight of the evidence was too much. Even the jury was shifting uncomfortably in their seats, their attention fully on the defense. Tasha's pulse raced. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But today she had done what she came here to do. She had exposed the lies, and now the truth was out there for everyone to see. As the courtroom adjourned for the day, Tasha felt a sense of accomplishment flood her chest. But she also knew the fight wasn't over. Grant was dangerous, and this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and hard, but she was no stranger to adversity. She had faced battles before, and she would face them again. But this time, she was ready. Tasha barely slept that night. The adrenaline from the courtroom had worn off, but the weight of the consequences still lingered. She lay awake in her apartment, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. The evidence she had presented, solid, undeniable, had shaken the very foundation of the case, but she knew that it had also made her a target. The days ahead weren't going to be easy. Exposing Officer Grant's corruption was just the beginning of a much larger battle. It wasn't just his career on the line now, it was the entire criminal network he was tied to. And as she'd learned in the Navy, when you go after people with that much power, they don't play fair. She was in the eye of a storm now. The calm before the chaos. The next morning, Tasha was up before dawn. She hadn't made any decisions yet about what she would do next. Ava had already warned her that there would likely be retaliation, but there was little they could do except stay vigilant and prepare for the worst. They didn't know how deep Grant's connections went, how far the web of corruption spread, but Tasha knew one thing for certain. It was far from over. She met with Ava in her office shortly after breakfast. The lawyer, ever composed, was already going over the next steps in the case. She glanced up as Tasha entered, offering a grim smile. "You did well yesterday, Tasha," Ava said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "But now we're entering a much more dangerous phase. The question is, how far do you think this goes?" Tasha sat down, running her fingers through her hair. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "But I know I'm not done yet, not by a long shot." Ava nodded. "We'll have to be careful. The prosecution is likely going to come at us hard. They're going to attack your character, discredit you, everything they can think of." "I'm ready for it," Tasha said firmly. "They've already tried to make me the villain. They'll do it again, but it won't work. Not this time." Ava studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. "You know, this case is bigger than we thought. I've been talking to some of my contacts, and there's more going on behind the scenes. Grant isn't just working with local criminals. He's connected to some high-level players, people who will go to any lengths to protect their interests." Tasha leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "What are you saying? Are you telling me there are more cops involved?" Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and it's not just law enforcement. There are politicians, business owners, even military contractors in the mix. We're dealing with a full-scale operation, Tasha. This isn't just about one corrupt cop anymore. This is about a network of people who are all protecting each other." Tasha clenched her fists. She had known that Grant was just a small part of a much bigger system, but hearing it from Ava made the threat even more real. This was no longer a case of corruption, it was organized crime, and she had unknowingly stumbled into the center of it. "What do we do now?" Tasha asked, her voice low. Ava paused, considering the best course of action. "We need to keep moving forward with the case, but we need to be prepared for any surprises. Grant will likely be playing dirty, and if these other people are involved, they're not going to sit idly by and let this unfold. We need to protect you, physically, legally, emotionally." Tasha nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'm ready. I don't care what they throw at me. I'm not backing down." Ava's gaze softened. "I know you're strong, Tasha, but even the strongest need to stay smart. You're going to need more than just legal counsel. You're going to need protection." By the time Tasha left the office, the sun was setting. The city streets had an eerie quietness about them, as if the calm before the storm was settling in. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Kyle, one of her fellow Navy SEALs. "Tasha, you need to be careful. We've got your back, but you're walking into something much bigger than you think. If you need help, don't hesitate to reach out. Just don't go it alone." The message was brief, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. She wasn't alone. She had a team behind her, and while she had no idea what would happen next, she was starting to realize that she could rely on them. That night, Tasha decided to head home early and review the case files. She had spent so much time fighting for her innocence that she hadn't taken a step back to think about her next move. But now, after hearing about the extent of the corruption, she realized that she needed a new strategy. She began reviewing the names of everyone involved in the case: police officers, politicians, anyone who could have a stake in the outcome. The more she read, the more she began to connect the dots. Grant's involvement with criminals was just the tip of the iceberg. These people were well connected, and they had resources that could easily make her life a living hell. As Tasha scrolled through the pages, one name kept cropping up: Detective Henry Wells. He was an officer who had been a part of Grant's inner circle for years. He had connections to several businesses and had been involved in some questionable dealings in the past, but he had always managed to stay just under the radar. Tasha's gut told her that Wells was involved in this, somehow, some way, and if she could get to him, she might be able to dismantle the entire operation. She made a note to follow up on him tomorrow. But just as she was about to close the file, her phone rang. It was Ava. "Tasha, listen to me carefully," Ava said, her voice urgent. "We just got word that someone's been tailing you. We don't know who it is yet, but they're definitely watching your every move. Be careful. Don't trust anyone right now. Not even people close to you. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had known things were going to get dangerous, but hearing the confirmation sent a chill down her spine. "I'll be careful," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll make sure I'm not alone." As she ended the call, Tasha glanced out the window. The city was still, too still, and she knew deep down that things were about to escalate. The target was on her back now, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. It was time to fight, smarter. And she wasn't going to stop until the truth came out, no matter what. The night had fallen in a suffocating silence. The city, once buzzing with energy, now felt like a predator's den, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. Tasha's mind raced with everything she had learned, the corruption, the network of powerful people, and the hidden alliances that stretched far beyond the courtroom. Every step she took seemed to draw her deeper into the spider's web, and she knew there was no turning back. But she wasn't scared. Not anymore. The truth was on her side, and the time had come to take this fight to the next level. Tasha sat in her car, parked just a few blocks away from Detective Henry Wells's apartment building. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streets were empty, except for a few late-night walkers and the distant hum of traffic. She adjusted the rearview mirror, checking for any signs of tailing. Nothing. For now, she was in the clear. But that didn't mean she was safe. She had been keeping a low profile for the past couple of days, laying low and avoiding unnecessary attention. The word from Ava had been clear. Someone was watching her. The only thing she could do now was stay one step ahead of them. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Kyle. "We're close, Tasha. I've got eyes on Wells's apartment. Be careful. If things go south, we'll move in." Tasha didn't respond. She didn't need to. She trusted Kyle, and she knew her team was ready. This wasn't the first time they'd operated in dangerous circumstances, but this time the stakes were higher. She turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, pulling her jacket tighter around her frame. Her heart thudded in her chest, but her movements were deliberate, controlled. She wasn't just walking into this blindly. She had a plan. Tasha moved swiftly through the alleyways behind the apartment complex, staying in the shadows. The area was quiet, save for the occasional car passing by. She paused behind a dumpster and pulled out her phone, checking the live feed from her team's surveillance cameras. Well's apartment was on the top floor, a corner unit with an unobstructed view of the surrounding area. Tasha studied the camera angles, analyzing the entry points, the windows, the doors. She had been watching this building for days, studying Wells's movements, trying to predict his patterns. Tonight, she was going to confront him, upstairs in his apartment. Wells was just finishing his late dinner when the knock came at his door. He paused, listening for a moment. No one ever came knocking at his door this late unless they were part of the plan. His hand instinctively moved to his gun, tucked under his jacket, but he hesitated. Who was it? He peered through the peephole, but saw nothing. That was strange. He had a few trusted contacts, but none of them were expecting him. Still, something about the silence felt off. His instincts, honed over years of police work, told him to stay alert. He opened the door, gun in hand, ready for whatever was about to come. But as he swung the door open, Tasha was already inside, her movements swift and precise. Before he could even react, she had disarmed him, pushing him back into the apartment with a force that left him momentarily stunned. "I know what you're doing, Wells," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "I know everything." He stumbled back, eyes wide, realizing too late that she wasn't here for a friendly chat. "How you've got no idea what you're up against," Wells spat, regaining his composure. "You don't know who you're messing with." Tasha stood her ground, her eyes narrowing. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. You're the one who doesn't. Know who you're dealing with." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. She wasn't the same woman who had been dragged into this case. No, this Tasha was sharper, more dangerous, more willing to do whatever it took to take down the people who had ruined her life. "You can either talk now or I can make you talk later," she said, her voice ice-cold. "But I'm not leaving until I get the answers I need." Wells swallowed hard, the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He had underestimated her. He thought she was just some regular civilian caught in the middle of a dirty cop's mess. But she was much more than that. Tasha took a step forward, her eyes locked on his, willing him to crack. Grant's not the only one in this. I've got the evidence, Wells. I've got recordings, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies. It's over. But I need to know how deep this goes. Who else is involved? Who else do I need to bring down? Wells hesitated, his mind racing. He knew if he gave her anything, it would be his end. But if he didn't talk, she'd find another way to break him. You think you've got it all figured out? You think you can just waltz in here and take down people like Grant? Like me? Wells scoffed, but there was a hint of fear in his voice. You have no idea what you're really up against. Tasha's gaze hardened. I'm not leaving until you tell me who's at the top, who's pulling the strings. Wells' facade began to crack. He was cornered, and he knew it. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, exhausted sigh. All right, I'll talk. But you're not going to like what you hear. There are more of us, people who aren't as easy to get to as me. You've made a big mistake coming here. Tasha's grip tightened on his collar. I'm not afraid of them. Wells swallowed again. You should be, but if you want names, I'll give them to you. You need to go after the big players, not just Grant. You need to go after the people who can make you disappear without anyone ever finding out. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had already known it, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through her. These were not just small-time criminals, they were powerful, far-reaching. The kind of people who could destroy her and everyone she loved without a second thought. Give me the names, Tasha demanded. Wells hesitated for a moment longer. Then he spoke. Start with Senator Roger Delaney. He's been funneling money to the operation for years. He's got a lot of influence. Then there's Mark Jacobs, the CEO of Jacobs Enterprises. He's been the one laundering the money. And there's Charlie Reed, a former cop with ties to the military. Tasha's mind was already running through the implications. This was much bigger than she had thought. But she was no longer scared. She was more determined than ever. Thank you for your cooperation, she said coldly, before slamming the door behind her as she left the apartment. As she stepped back into the night, the pieces were finally starting to come together. But she knew the war was just beginning. The fifties, people she had to face next, weren't just criminals. They were powerful, dangerous, and willing to do anything to protect their empire. And Tasha? She was just getting started. Tasha walked through the quiet streets, her mind racing with the names Wells had given her. Senator Roger Delaney, Mark Jacobs, Charlie Reed. These weren't just petty criminals. These were powerful people. Senators, CEOs, former cops with ties to military contracts. People who had everything to lose and would stop at nothing to protect their empire. But now, for the first time, Tasha had a piece of the puzzle. She had the names of the players in this larger game. And she was determined to bring them down. She was so focused on her next move that she barely noticed the black car that had been trailing her for the past few blocks. A few minutes later, the car slowed to a stop next to her, its windows tinted, its engine purring ominously in the night. Tasha instinctively reached for the gun hidden under her jacket, her fingers tightening around the handle. The window rolled down slowly, and Tasha could make out the figure inside, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark sunglasses, even though it was late in the evening. Tasha Miller, the man said in a low, gravelly voice. I think we need to talk. Tasha didn't flinch, keeping her distance. She had learned long ago not to trust anyone who made their presence known like this. And who exactly are you? She asked coolly, her eyes narrowing. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calculated, like he knew something she didn't. Let's just say I work for someone who's very interested in your little investigation. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected someone would come for her eventually, but she hadn't expected it this soon. She knew it was time to play her cards carefully. If you're here to warn me off, you're wasting your time. The man's smile didn't fade. Oh, we're not here to warn you, Miss Miller. We're here to offer you a choice. Tasha stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. You've made a lot of noise. The things you're digging into, it's dangerous. You could be making a lot of people uncomfortable. His voice was low and dangerous. But there's still a way for you to walk away from all of this. We can make sure you're protected. We can make sure nothing happens to you. All you need to do is stop. Drop the investigation, walk away from this fight. Tasha's grip on her gun tightened. This wasn't a warning. It was an ultimatum. How you think I'm just going to walk away because you tell me to? Tasha said, her voice steady, though inside her pulse raced. You're gravely mistaken. The man leaned closer, his voice now more insistent, almost pleading. This isn't a game. Ms. Miller, there are forces at work here far beyond your understanding. These people, they don't stop. And if you don't stop, they'll make sure you disappear. Tasha felt the weight of his words, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't backing down. She never had before. If I disappear, then it's because they were too weak to stop me, Tasha said, her eyes burning with determination. Now get out of my way. The man seemed to size her up for a moment, as if deciding whether or not she was worth the effort. Finally, he leaned back, his expression shifting slightly, almost impressed. All right, he said, voice quieter now. You've made your choice. But remember, we offered you a way out. There's no going back now. The window rolled up and the car slowly drove off into the night, leaving Tasha standing on the sidewalk, her heart still racing. She had expected threats, but this one felt different, more personal. It was clear now that she was becoming a major target in this fight, but as she stood there looking after the car, something in her hardened. She wasn't going to back down. She was already too deep. You think I'll quit? You don't know who you're messing with, she muttered under her breath. The next morning, Tasha met with Ava at a coffee shop, the atmosphere casual, but the tension between them palpable. They needed to strategize. Ava didn't mince words. We've got a serious problem. Whoever's behind this is making their move. They're not just trying to intimidate you, they're trying to scare you into stopping. And I'm guessing last night's visit was only the beginning. Tasha nodded, grimly, taking a sip of her coffee. Yeah, that's what I thought too, but I'm not backing down. Ava set down her cup and looked at Tasha with concern. I know you're strong, Tasha, but I need to be clear. This is dangerous. We're talking about people with a lot of power. I don't think you realize just how high up this goes. You're fighting an army here. Tasha met her gaze without flinching. Then I'll need an army of my own. Ava hesitated, but then nodded. All right, but we need to be smart. I've been doing some digging. You were right to go after Wells, but there's more to it. Senator Delaney has a lot of clout. His ties go beyond just money. He's connected to military contracts, private security firms, and even intelligence agencies. He's not just a politician. He's a player in this network, and he's ruthless. Tasha's eyes hardened. I don't care how high he is, I'm going after him. Ava leaned in, speaking more urgently. You need to be careful. If you go after him directly, it's not just your life at risk, it's everyone you care about. These people can make you disappear without leaving a trace. They've done it before, and they'll do it again. Tasha's mind was already running through the possibilities. She knew what she had to do. Then I'll make sure they know I'm coming for them. I'll get to Delaney, and I'll make sure everyone knows what he's been doing. But I need more. I need to bring this whole operation down, and I need to start taking down the big players one by one. Ava nodded, her expression serious. All right, I'll start pulling some strings. We'll need backup. You won't be able to do this alone. Tasha stood up, her resolve steeling. I've never been alone, Ava. I've got a team. And now I've got a target. The days ahead would be filled with danger, deception, and a relentless pursuit of the truth. But Tasha knew that she wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The storm was coming, and she was ready for it. The tension was unbearable. Every minute that passed seemed to pull Tasha deeper into a world she never intended to enter. A world where secrets ran deeper than the roots of an ancient tree, and where the only way out was through sheer willpower and determination. The visit from the mysterious man the night before still lingered in her mind. He wasn't just a messenger, he was a warning. But that only strengthened her resolve. Today she was no longer just a woman seeking justice. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with. Tasha met with Kyle early that morning. He was always the first to show up, always the one with the quiet, yet efficient presence that brought a sense of calm to her ever-churning thoughts. I've been tracking Delaney's movements, Kyle said. pulling out a series of maps and digital files on his tablet. It's all tied together. The senator's donations, the private security firms, and those shady military contracts. The pieces you've been collecting fit. Tasha leaned over his shoulder, watching the screen. The names she had gathered so far, Delaney, Jacobs, Reed, were only part of the puzzle. Behind them, there were networks of people, hidden alliances, and backdoor deals, many of which were just as powerful and dangerous. She couldn't just attack one of them and hope for the best. She needed to cut the web at its core. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with determination. Kyle adjusted his glasses and looked at her. "I've been working with a few contacts inside the system. We've got eyes on the people connected to Delaney, but it's going to take time to trace everything back to the top. In the meantime, we need leverage." Tasha's eyes gleamed. "Leverage? What do you have in mind?" Kyle turned to a set of documents he had pulled up on his screen. "I managed to get some footage from a private meeting Delaney had with a few high-profile investors. It's subtle, but there's one thing that stands out. In the background, there's a man talking to Delaney, a man who's got a reputation for making people disappear." Tasha's gut tightened. "Who is he?" "His name's Charlie Reed," Kyle replied, glancing at her. "The same Charlie Reed you've been hearing about. He's not just some low-level fixer. He's someone with deep connections in intelligence, law enforcement, and even the military. He's untouchable, and that's why Delaney's been working with him." Tasha's mind was already running through the possibilities. "I need to know more about this Reed. If we can get to him, we might just be able to bring down everything." Kyle's fingers flew over the tablet, pulling up a photo of Reed. A man in his late 40s with hard eyes and a cold, calculating expression. "Here, but be careful. Reed isn't just a player. He's a puppet master. You go after him, and you'll find yourself dealing with forces you can't even imagine." Tasha didn't blink. "I'm not afraid of him. Let's find out where he's hiding and let's make him talk." Later that day, Tasha took the next step. She met with Ava again, this time in a less public setting. The two of them huddled. In a back corner of a small diner on the edge of town, the noise of the outside world muffled by the thick walls. "We need eyes on Charlie Reed," Tasha began without preamble. "I know he's tied to Delaney. If we get to him, we can dismantle everything." Ava gave her a long look, her expression filled with concern. "I don't know, Tasha. Reed isn't just some thug. He's connected to a lot of dangerous people, and he knows how to cover his tracks. Getting close to him is risky." Tasha leaned forward, her jaw set in determination. "We don't have time to waste. Every minute we spend sitting here is a minute they're getting closer to covering their tracks. We need to move fast." Ava hesitated but finally nodded. "All right. I've got a few contacts who can help. But you're right, this isn't going to be easy." That night, Tasha and Ava began their work. The first step was to find Reed. They had a location, an old warehouse just outside the city where he had been spotted meeting with Delaney's associates. It was a shot in the dark, but Tasha was used to operating that way. They arrived in the dead of night, the air thick with anticipation. The warehouse was a massive industrial structure surrounded by trees and long stretches of dirt road. It looked abandoned, but Tasha knew better than to trust appearances. "Stay close, Ava," Tasha whispered as they moved toward the entrance, staying low and out of sight. This could get ugly fast. They approached the back of the building, the sound of their footsteps barely audible on the gravel. Tasha's mind was running through the plan they had discussed earlier. If they could get inside undetected, they might be able to find evidence connecting Reed to the larger operation. But if they got caught, it would be a disaster. As they reached the back door, Tasha paused and signaled for Ava to stop. She listened for any movement inside. Nothing. She slowly pushed the door open, and they slipped inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, with shadows stretching long across the concrete floor. Tasha's heart raced, but she kept her breathing steady. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the distance, a low murmur of conversation. Tasha motioned for Ava to stay. Silent. They moved deeper into the shadows, each step bringing them closer to the source of the sound. And then, in the distance, she saw him. Charlie Reed. He stood with his back to them, talking to someone, his voice low and controlled, a voice that made you listen. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest. They were so close. "We have to move," she whispered, signaling to Ava. They crept closer, keeping their distance, but suddenly Reed turned. His eyes flicked toward them, narrowing. Tasha didn't have time to react. He had already seen them. Reed's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Well, well, looks like we've got company." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They had to leave, and fast. But now they were trapped in the warehouse, surrounded by an enemy who knew how to fight back. Reed took a step forward, his expression calculating. "You're in deep now, Tasha. You've made a huge mistake coming here." Tasha's mind raced. They had no choice but to make a stand, but she couldn't fight him alone. Not yet. "This isn't over, Reed," she said, her voice steady but full of resolve. "You're not getting away with this." Reed's smile faltered just for a moment before he reached into his coat and pulled out a gun. "We'll see about that." The game was changing. Tasha wasn't backing down, and she knew one thing for sure. This fight was just beginning. The cold metal of the gun gleamed in Charlie Reed's hand as he pointed it directly at Tasha. The warehouse around them felt like it was closing in, the shadows almost alive, as if watching the confrontation unfold. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained focused. She couldn't afford to panic, not now, not when everything was on the line. Reed's eyes glinted with malicious amusement. "I'll admit you've got guts, Tasha, but you're in way over your head." His voice was smooth like honey, but there was a coldness underneath. "I don't know what you think you're going to achieve here, but it's already too late. You're digging in places that you don't belong." Tasha remained calm, keeping her eyes locked on Reed's. Every instinct screamed at her to make a move, to disarm him, to strike first. But she needed to outthink him, not outmuscle him. This wasn't a fight she could win with brute force, not yet. "I'm not going anywhere, Reed," Tasha said, her voice unwavering. "And neither are you." Reed's smile widened, but it wasn't kind. "You really think you can stop me? You've been poking at the wrong people, and now they'll make sure you regret it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You think you're some kind of hero, but heroes always end up dead or broken. You don't even know what you're really up against." Tasha didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm up against, and I'm not scared of you, Reed." He took a step closer, the barrel of the gun still aimed at her chest. But Tasha stood her ground. "So go ahead. Pull the trigger." For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. But Reed didn't move. Instead, his expression shifted from amusement to something more dangerous, more calculating. "You don't get it, do you?" Reed said slowly, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about just you. It's about people like Delaney and Jacobs, the people pulling the strings. You think they'll just let you keep digging? You're nothing but a loose thread that'll unravel. The whole thing if you're not careful." Tasha didn't blink. "And if I stop now, what happens? Do I get to walk away? Do you think I'm just going to let you and your friends destroy everything I've worked for?" Reed's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you're the only one who's been betrayed? The only one who's suffered? The people you're up against, Tasha, they don't care about right and wrong. They only care about power. And once you understand that, maybe you'll stop trying to be a hero." Tasha's mind raced. He was trying to get inside her head, trying to make her doubt herself. But she wasn't about to let that happen. She wasn't in this fight for glory, for fame, or for any sense of righteousness. She was in this because she had to be, because the people who had already suffered at the hands of men like Reed and Delaney didn't have anyone else, and she would be their voice. "No matter the cost. I don't care about being a hero," Tasha said, her voice cold. "I care about the truth, and you won't stop me from getting to it." Reed chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "All right, have it your way. But just remember you were warned. People like you don't survive long when they take on people like me." He stepped back, lowering the gun slightly, but Tasha knew better than to let her guard down. She was about to make her move when suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. A voice shouted, "Tasha, move!" Without thinking, Tasha dove to the side, pulling Ava with her. The sound of a gunshot rang out, and she felt a gust of wind as the bullet zipped past them. The moment was a blur. Chaos erupted as more figures stepped into the warehouse, their shadows long and menacing. Tasha's instincts kicked in. She grabbed Ava's hand and pulled her toward cover behind a stack of crates. "Stay down!" Tasha hissed. She had no idea who was coming for them, but she knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Tasha's heart was pounding in her chest, every muscle in her body tensed and ready. She could hear the muffled voices of Reed's men as they began to move into the warehouse, searching for them. "I'll take the left flank. You cover me," Tasha whispered to Ava. Ava nodded, clutching her own gun. "I've got your back." Tasha peeked over the crates, her eyes scanning the room. She couldn't make out every figure in the shadows, but she saw enough to know that they weren't just here to intimidate, they were here to kill. Her grip tightened on her weapon as she carefully made her move. They had to get out of there. Fast. But before she could make a move, one of Reed's men spotted her. "There she is," he yelled. The room erupted into action. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as Tasha and Ava scrambled to find cover. It was chaos, pure and simple. Tasha could feel her pulse in her ears, the sound of gunfire deafening as she ducked behind a pile of crates, her thoughts racing. "Ava, on the count of 3, follow me." Tasha shouted over the noise. Ava's voice was steady, though there was a hint of fear in it. "I'm with you." Tasha counted down in her head. 1, 2, 3. On 3, they moved. Tasha sprinted for cover, firing a few shots to keep their enemies pinned down, while Ava stayed close, covering their backs. But just as they reached the door, another gunshot rang out. This time it was too close. Tasha felt a sharp pain in her side. "No!" Ava shouted, but Tasha waved her off. "I'm fine." Tasha gritted through her teeth, though she knew she wasn't. Blood soaked her side, but she couldn't afford to. "Stop." They were almost at the door when Reed's voice echoed through the warehouse, cold and calm. "This is over, Tasha. You can run, but you'll never escape." Tasha's grip tightened around her weapon. She had come too far to turn back now. She was going to survive this, and she was going to win. With one last burst of energy, she and Ava pushed through the door, slipping into the darkness outside. The night air felt cool against Tasha's skin, but it did little to ease the burning pain in her side. They had made it out, but this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As they ran toward the car, Tasha glanced over at Ava. "Get us to safety. I need to make some calls." Ava didn't need any more prompting. She slid behind the wheel, speeding off into the night. Tasha's mind was already working, calculating the next steps. She had survived the first round, but the war had just begun. Car sped down the empty streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Tasha's mind was racing, adrenaline still coursing through her veins despite the pain from the gunshot wound. She couldn't afford to think about the wound right. Now there were bigger things to focus on. Ava's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "We need to get you to a hospital, Tasha. You're losing blood." Tasha shook her head, wincing slightly, as the movement tugged at the pain in her side. "I don't have time for a hospital. We don't know how much time we have before Reed and his guys come after us again. We need to make sure we're not followed." Ava looked over at her briefly, concern etched on her face. "Tasha, you're not invincible. We can't just ignore this. You're in bad shape." Tasha turned her gaze to the window, watching the city pass by in a blur. "I don't have a choice, Ava. I'm not stopping until I bring Reed down. He's tied to Delaney, and Delaney's tied to everything we've been investigating. If I stop now, everything we've done will be for nothing." Ava didn't say anything more, but Tasha could feel the weight of her worry in the silence that stretched between them. They'd both known this was going to be dangerous, but they never expected it to get this intense, this quickly. Every step they took was leading them deeper into a world that didn't just want to stop them, it wanted to destroy them. The sound of Tasha's phone vibrating broke the silence in the car. She pulled it from her pocket, glancing at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize, but there was something in her gut that told her to answer. "Tasha?" A deep voice on the other end spoke, cutting through the air like a blade. She froze for a second, recognizing the voice before her mind could fully process. It was Agent Walker from the FBI, the man who had been involved in her investigation from the start. "Walker," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. "What's going on?" Walker's voice was low and urgent. You're in danger, Tasha. There's something bigger going on here than you realize. Reed isn't just some hired muscle. He's part of a much larger operation, and it's connected to people in high places. People who can make this disappear. Without a trace. Tasha's heart raced. What do you mean? What's going on? Walker paused for a moment before continuing. I don't have all the details, but I'm getting some troubling intel. I've had eyes on Reed's operations for months now, and it's clear he's connected to a network that extends far beyond the criminal underworld. He's linked to some of the most influential people in the government and private sector. Delaney's just the tip of the iceberg. Tasha's mind was spinning. So it's not just Delaney I'm up against. It's the whole system. Exactly, Walker replied, his voice grim. And I'm afraid you've become a target. Reed's not just after you, he's after anyone who could expose what's really going on. You need to be careful. You're not alone in this, but you need to trust me. I can help. Tasha's grip on her phone tightened. I don't trust anyone right now, Walker. Not after what happened to my team. You had a chance to stop this, and you didn't. There was a long silence on the other end. When Walker spoke again, his tone was more serious than before. I get why you're angry, I do, but I'm on your side, Tasha. I'm trying to help you, but you have to listen. There are bigger forces at play here, and if you keep going down this path alone, you're going to walk right into their trap. Let me help you take Reed down from the inside. You don't have to do this on your own. Tasha felt a surge of emotion, anger, frustration, and something else. And what's in it for you, Walker? You think I'm just going to trust you because you say so? I'm not asking you to trust me, Walker replied, his voice softer now. I'm asking you to trust the work we've done together, the information we've gathered. I can give you the support you need. But I need you to be smart about this. If you go after Reed without backup, you're playing right into his hands. Tasha was silent for a long moment, processing everything Walker had said. She didn't like it, didn't like the feeling that there was a conspiracy deeper than what she could see, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. If she kept going on her own, she would be risking everything. She didn't have the luxury of making mistakes anymore. Fine, Tasha said at last, her voice tight with determination. I'll work with you. But you better keep your word. If I'm going down, you're going down with me. Walker's voice lightened ever so slightly. You have my word, I'll be in touch soon, but in the meantime, get somewhere safe. And don't trust anyone outside of this call. The line went dead before Tasha could respond. She dropped the phone into her lap, staring out the windshield, her mind racing. Ava glanced at her from the corner of her eye. What did he say? Tasha didn't look at her, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. We've got bigger problems than I thought. Walker says Reed's part of a larger operation, one that goes all the way to the top. Ava was quiet for a moment, processing the news. So what do we do now? Tasha's jaw tightened. We keep moving forward. We get to Reed before he gets to us. But we're going to need to be smart about this. If we make one wrong move, it could cost us everything. Ava nodded in agreement, her expression resolute. Let's make it count then. Tasha turned her attention back to the road, knowing that the path ahead would be anything but easy. But she was already too deep into this to back out now. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had suffered at the hands of people like Reed and Delaney. And no matter what, she wouldn't stop until they were all brought down. The tension in the car was palpable as they sped through the darkened streets. Tasha's mind was still racing from the phone call with Walker, the weight of his words pressing heavily on her chest. Reed wasn't just a thug trying to cover his tracks. He was part of something far more dangerous, a network of powerful individuals who could pull strings from the shadows and make people like her disappear without a trace. Ava kept her focus on the road ahead, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of being followed. They were on high alert now. Every street, every turn, every parked car could be a potential threat. Where are we heading? Ava's voice broke the silence, though it wasn't the first time she'd asked the question. Tasha hadn't given her a clear answer yet. Tasha didn't respond right away. She was still thinking through the next steps. Every plan she made seemed to get more complicated by the minute. The moment she thought she had a handle on things, Another piece of the puzzle would fall into place, shifting everything out of alignment. "We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere we can lay low for a while," Tasha said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'll call Walker back. He said he'd reach out with more info soon." Ava glanced over at her. "Do you trust him?" Tasha didn't hesitate. "I don't trust anyone right now, but he's right about one thing. This is bigger than just us. We need all the help we can get." Ava nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. They drove in silence for a few more minutes before Tasha's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. She glanced at the screen, recognizing the number immediately. It was from Walker. "Meet me at 17119 Westbrook Ave. Midnight." Trust. No one. Tasha's stomach tightened. Westbrook Avenue wasn't far from where they were, but it was a sketchy neighborhood. Dark alleys, abandoned buildings, and a heavy criminal presence made it a place that would attract unwanted attention. But there was no choice. If Walker had information, they had to get it, no matter the risks. "We're meeting Walker," Tasha said, her tone resolute. "Get ready." Ava's eyes flicked to her. "You're sure about this? It's not just him giving you the runaround?" Tasha let out a breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't have a choice. If this really goes all the way to the top, he's our best shot at finding out who's pulling the strings. We can't go at this alone." They arrived at Westbrook Avenue shortly before midnight. The street was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The buildings around them were old, their windows boarded up, casting long shadows in the dim light. Tasha's instincts told her this was a place meant for hiding. People didn't come here unless they had something to hide, or they themselves were hiding. Ava slowed the car and parked a few blocks away from the meeting spot. Tasha quickly scanned the area, her eyes darting from the darkened street corners to the looming buildings around them. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Stay sharp," Tasha whispered. "I don't trust anyone here, not even Walker. We don't know who's watching." Ava didn't respond, but the look in her eyes was enough. They both knew what they were walking into. Tasha adjusted her jacket, ensuring her weapon was within easy reach, and then she stepped out of the car. Ava followed close behind, moving quickly but cautiously. They crossed the street and approached the building where they were supposed to meet Walker. The address was marked on a peeling sign above, a rusted door. No lights, no signs of life. Tasha knocked 3 times on the door, a signal they had agreed upon in case things went wrong. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. Walker stood at the threshold, his expression hard. To read, he motioned for them to enter. "Come on in, but keep it quick," Walker said, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they weren't being followed. Tasha stepped inside, Ava right behind her. They followed Walker down a narrow hallway and into a small windowless room. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak light across a table cluttered with papers, files, and an old laptop. The room had the sterile, impersonal feel of an abandoned safe house. No warmth, no signs of life. "You're not exactly being subtle, Walker," Tasha said, her tone laced with irritation. "What's going on? Why are we meeting here?" Walker closed the door behind them and locked it, his gaze flicking nervously to the corners of the room. "I'm sorry for the secrecy, but I needed to make sure we weren't being watched. This is bigger than you think, Tasha. If we don't move carefully, we're both dead." Tasha's eyes narrowed. "Then talk. What's going on?" Walker pulled out a file from the pile on the table and handed it to her. "I've been tracking Reed's movements for weeks. What I've uncovered is enough to make your blood run cold. Reed's not just involved in some rogue operation. He's part of an international syndicate that's been manipulating government officials, corporate leaders, and law enforcement. They're in deep with people who have the resources to erase anyone who stands in their way." Tasha opened the file and began scanning the documents inside. Names, dates, and connections filled the pages, and the more she read, the worse it got. This wasn't just about her trying to expose corruption anymore. This was a war, and she was on the front lines of it. "Reed's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't he?" Tasha murmured, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "There are bigger players involved, people who think they're untouchable." Walker nodded grimly. "Exactly. And I'm afraid you've already pissed off some of the wrong people. You think Reed's bad? Wait until you see who's really in charge. Tasha closed the file with a snap, her face hardening. I don't care who they are. I'm going after them all, but I can't do it alone. I need your help, Walker. You said you had a plan. Walker hesitated for a moment before pulling up a map on the laptop. This is the next target. One of the main players, a corporate billionaire named Victor Delaney. He's the one funding the entire operation. If we take him down, we cut the head off the snake. Tasha stared at the map, her mind already calculating the next steps. When do we move? Walker's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. Soon. But you need to understand this won't be easy. Delaney has security, high-tech military-grade stuff, and he won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets too close. Tasha's eyes burned with determination. Then we'll make sure we get close enough. As she stood there, a cold feeling settled in her chest. This wasn't just about one man anymore. This was about bringing down a system, a network so entrenched that it might be impossible to break. But Tasha wasn't about to back down. Not after everything she had sacrificed. She was going to take them down, no matter the cost. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of the overhead light. Tasha sat at the table, her gaze fixed on the map Walker had pulled up on the laptop. Ava stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. The weight of the situation settled over them like a thick fog, suffocating every thought. Delaney. The name echoed in Tasha's mind like a death sentence. She had seen the name on the papers before, on reports, in passing conversations, but never connected it to something this dangerous. A corporate billionaire, a puppet master behind the scenes, pulling strings on everything from law enforcement to government policies. And yet, in all the years she'd been in the Navy, she had never once come across anything solid that could take him down. Tasha's fingers drummed the table as she stared at the map, trying to piece together the next step. Delaney wasn't someone you could just walk into a room and confront. He had layers of security, connections that reached into every corner of power. "What's the play here, Walker?" she asked, her voice cold. Walker leaned forward, tapping. "On the map. Delaney's mansion is well guarded, private security, top-tier tech, the whole package, but there's a weak spot." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "We can't go in guns blazing. We'll need to be more subtle. Get in, get the intel we need, and get out before anyone realizes we were ever there." Ava stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Subtle? After everything we've been through, we're going to play it cool?" Walker's eyes flicked to her. "You've got to understand, Ava. If we go in too strong, Delaney will shut everything down before we even get close. We can't afford to make a mistake." Tasha met his gaze. "And if we don't make a move soon, Delaney and his people will be the ones making all the decisions. They've got too much power. We can't let this go on any longer." Walker nodded. "Exactly. Which is why we need to move carefully." He stood up and walked over to a small cabinet on the wall, pulling out a few items and setting them on the table. A set of blueprints, a few small devices, and a few high-tech gadgets. "This is our way in." He pointed to a small door marked on the blueprints. "Delaney's mansion has a security system that's nearly impenetrable, but there's one section of the house, the staff entrance, that's poorly monitored. I've managed to gather intel on a gap in the system. It'll give us a window to get in unnoticed." Tasha nodded, her fingers brushing over the blueprints. "And once we're in?" "We'll split up," Walker said, his tone deliberate. "You and I will head to the security room. Ava, you'll monitor the situation and keep an eye on the perimeter. If anything goes wrong, we bail. Fast." Tasha glanced at Ava, who nodded, her face serious. "Understood. But we're not walking out empty-handed, right?" "Not a chance." Walker's lips curled into a tight smile. "We'll get the intel we need on Delaney and his operation. It's time to cut the head off the snake." The plan was set, and they all knew there was no turning back. Time was running out. Delaney's empire wasn't going to wait around for them to make a mistake. As midnight approached, Tasha gathered herself, slipping her gear on silently. She wasn't nervous. She had been in more life-threatening situations than she could count. But something about this felt different. This wasn't just another mission, this was personal. She wasn't fighting for her life alone anymore. She was fighting for the truth, and for everyone who had been lost to the web of corruption Delaney had built. Ava finished checking her equipment, her eyes meeting Tasha's. "Ready?" Tasha's gaze was unwavering. "I was born ready." They left the safe house quietly, slipping into the shadows of the night. Every movement was calculated, every step taken with purpose. Tasha's heart beat steadily in her chest, the calm before the storm settling over her. They arrived at the perimeter of Delaney's estate a short time later. The mansion loomed in the distance, surrounded by high fences, cameras, and armed guards. It was exactly the kind of place that made you feel small and insignificant in the face of its opulence and power. Walker led the way, guiding them through a series of back alleys to a service road behind the estate. The staff entrance was tucked away, almost invisible from view. It was a risk, but the only one they had. Tasha glanced at her watch. "We don't have much time. Let's move." They slipped past the gate and approached the entrance, their movements quick and fluid. Ava was already at the far end of the alley, keeping watch as Walker and Tasha approached the back door. Walker pulled out a small device and plugged it into the door's security panel. A faint click echoed in the still air as the lock disengaged. He pushed the door open and they stepped inside into the cool darkness of the mansion's service area. The air smelled faintly of industrial cleaners and old wood. It was a stark contrast to the lavish wealth that was no doubt just beyond the walls. Tasha felt a twinge of disgust. She had seen too much of this world, the world where the powerful lived without consequence, while people like her were left to fight for scraps. This way. Walker motioned for them to follow, leading them through a maze of narrow hallways. They moved silently, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors. They reached a small stairwell leading down to the mansion's lower level. Walker stopped at the door, pausing to listen. There was no sign of movement. "We're in," Tasha said, her voice a whisper. "Let's finish this." They descended into the belly of the beast, unaware of the dangers that awaited them. The walls seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker with every step. The deeper they went, the more Tasha's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. There were too many silent moments, too much quiet. Something was wrong. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the quiet shuffle of their footsteps as they moved through the mansion's lower levels. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every corner felt like it might hold something or someone waiting for them. Tasha's senses were on high alert. Her body was trained for this, silent, quick, efficient, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The deeper they moved into the mansion, the more the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. There was something almost suffocating about the place. It felt like a trap. "I don't like this," Ava whispered, her voice low and cautious. Tasha didn't answer right away. She had no time for doubts, but she couldn't shake the same unease that had taken root in Ava's voice. "Keep moving," she replied, her own voice barely a murmur. They couldn't afford to second-guess themselves now. They reached a door at the end of a narrow hallway. It was marked with a small plaque, "Security Room," but the moment Tasha laid her hand on the door, a chilling thought crossed her mind. It was too easy. There had been no guards at the back entrance, no immediate security response. It felt like they were being led directly to this point, set up for a fall. "Walker," Tasha whispered into her comms, her fingers frozen on the handle. "Something's not right. Are you sure we're not walking into a trap?" She could almost hear Walker's calm voice on the other end. "You're fine, just get inside, get the intel and get out. We're almost there, trust me. Trust him." The words echoed in Tasha's mind, but a dark pit of doubt was beginning to form. Everything had seemed too smooth so far, too easy. With a quick nod to Ava, Tasha opened the door. It was a small, sterile room. The hum of security equipment filled the air. Screens flickered with grainy footage of various rooms around the mansion, but there was no one in sight. Tasha stepped inside, her hand on the pistol at her side. Ava followed closely, her eyes scanning the room for any threats. The walls were lined with screens, monitors, and buttons, standard security setup. "Walker said the files we need will be in here," Tasha muttered as she moved towards a nearby desk. Ava moved to one of the monitors, her fingers quickly flicking over the controls. "I'm checking the footage. Let's see what we can dig up." Tasha's eyes were drawn to a drawer at the side of the desk. She approached it cautiously, her heartbeat quickening. She pulled it open, and there, right on top, was a stack of folders. These weren't just regular papers, they were the type of documents someone would go to extreme lengths to hide. "Found something," she muttered, just as she reached for the stack. A sharp sound came from behind them, a door creaking open followed by muffled voices. Tasha froze. It wasn't just one voice, it was two, maybe three. "We're not alone," Ava hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. Tasha's heart rate spiked, but she didn't panic. She had been in worse situations. Without hesitation, she shoved the documents into her bag and motioned for Ava to follow. "Get ready, we need to move now." They turned, ready to make their exit, but the door to the security room slammed open before they could take another step. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, his expression cold and calculating. Behind him were two armed guards, both holding weapons aimed at them. Well, what do we have here?" The man's voice was smooth, almost amused, but there was an underlying menace in it that sent a chill through Tasha's spine. Tasha's instincts kicked in and she didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, she pulled out her gun, pointing it directly at the man. "Move, now." Ava stepped to the side, her own weapon trained on the guards. "I'd listen to her if I were you," she said, her voice steady despite the danger. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he raised an eyebrow, a twisted smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "You think you can just waltz into my home and walk out with my secrets? You've underestimated me." Tasha's grip tightened on her gun, but she didn't make a move. She was calculating, waiting for the right moment. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man's smile widened. "My name's Victor Delaney." For a moment, Tasha's blood ran cold. Delaney. The man behind everything. The one they had been chasing all this time. "You're a lot more hands-on than I expected," Tasha said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I thought you'd be hiding behind your people, not standing here in front of us." Delaney's smile never wavered. "I've learned that it's better to keep a close eye on things when your life's on the line. But it seems you've managed to make a bit of a mess." Ava's eyes darted between Tasha and the armed men. "What now?" Tasha's mind raced. Delaney wasn't here for a casual chat. He knew who they were, and worse, he knew what they were. "After." "We're leaving," Tasha said. But there was no real conviction in her voice. She knew they were trapped. This wasn't going to end without bloodshed. Delaney chuckled darkly, stepping into the room. "No, you're not. You're going to stay right here, and we're going to have a little conversation." His gaze flicked to the documents in Tasha's bag. "Those are mine, you know. You'll find I don't take kindly to thieves." Before Tasha could react, the door behind them slammed shut. A hidden door, she realized. They were being locked in. "You've made a huge mistake," Tasha said, her voice low, "but I'm not the one who's going to pay for it." The storm was brewing, and Tasha knew it was about to break. They were far from done, and the game had just changed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ban Ja Noi, next ChatGPT Ja Noi. Chapter 16. The Face of Power. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the lights above. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest as she faced Victor Delaney, the very man they had come to take down. She had never felt this close to the core of corruption, and now she was standing face to face with it. Ava's posture was tense beside her, every muscle coiled and ready to spring. The two armed men at the door didn't help the situation. It was clear that escape was no longer an option. For the first time in years, Tasha's nerves were frayed. She had never been captured, never been backed into a corner where the only way out was through violence. Victor Delaney stood there with that same unsettling smile, his hands casually resting on the back of a nearby chair. The power he exuded was palpable, and Tasha could almost feel it pressing down on her. This wasn't just some ordinary criminal. This man was a force in the world, a puppet master pulling strings that affected everything from politics to law enforcement to the very court system they had hoped to expose. "I have to admit, you're a lot more resourceful than I thought," Delaney said, his voice smooth, almost admiring. "But you've crossed a line now. You thought you could just slip into my world, take my secrets, and leave without consequences. Tasha's grip tightened on her weapon, but she knew she had to remain calm. We're not leaving without those documents, and we're not letting you continue your corrupt reign any longer. Delaney's smile faded slightly, but his eyes glinted with cold amusement. Oh, I'm afraid you've miscalculated. You see, I've been in this game much longer than you've been alive. I control everything. The moment you entered my home, you sealed your fate. My connections are untouchable, my influence absolute. Tasha didn't flinch. You're wrong. There's always a way to tear down even the most powerful empire. She could feel the heat rising in her chest. This man might have thought he was untouchable, but she had seen bigger threats brought down before. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ava leaned in slightly, her voice low but firm. Tasha's right, and you're about to find out just how much you underestimated us. Delaney's eyes darkened, and for the first time his smile disappeared entirely. You really don't understand, do you? He asked. You think you can stop me with a couple of guns and some documents? This is my world, not yours. And you've just made the worst mistake of your life. The armed men behind him shifted, their weapons still trained on the two women. But Tasha didn't let the tension throw her off. She was done with games. Let's make this simple, she said, her voice cutting through the air. You give us the intel, and maybe we walk out of here without anyone getting hurt. You make us fight for it, and we'll make sure you regret it. Delaney chuckled, stepping forward into the room. You think I'm scared of a couple of Navy SEALs? I've dealt with bigger threats than you. His eyes turned steely, his tone cold. And now, you're going to learn what happens when you cross the wrong person. Tasha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was clear now, Delaney wasn't just going to back down. There was no negotiating with him. He would stop at nothing to protect what he had built. Ava looked at Tasha, a silent understanding passing between them. They were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't just about taking down Delaney anymore. This was about survival. Just as Delaney opened his mouth to speak again, the lights in the room flickered once, then went out. A low buzzing sound echoed through the walls, followed by the sound of a door slamming open. What the hell? Delaney snapped, his gaze immediately shifting to the men behind him. What's going on? The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for a split second, before the emergency backup lighting kicked in. But the moment the lights returned, Delaney's posture stiffened. His eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ava's voice was barely a whisper, but Tasha could hear the tension in it. It's a diversion. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Walker, she muttered under her breath. The backup lighting cast long shadows, and for a brief moment Tasha's mind raced. They were no longer alone in the mansion. Walker had to be somewhere, and whatever distraction he had caused had given them the opening they needed. Delaney, now visibly agitated, motioned for his men to move. Find out what the hell is going on, he ordered sharply. But before the guards could react, a loud crash from the far side of the mansion shattered the tense atmosphere. The security personnel rushed out of the room, leaving the door open. For just a split second, Tasha didn't waste any time. Ava, go! With a swift motion, she grabbed Ava's arm, pulling her towards the door. They bolted down the hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Tasha's mind was on high alert as they made their way toward the exit. They had to move fast. Behind them, the sound of chaos grew louder. Delaney's voice echoed through the halls, demanding to know what was happening, but Tasha knew they couldn't stick around to find out. They had what they came for, the intel, the documents. A few more corners and they would be out of sight. But just as they neared the back stairwell, a shout rang out from behind them. Stop them! Tasha's heart skipped a beat as a group of guards appeared at the far end of the hallway. Weapons raised, the chase was on. Go! Tasha shouted, her voice sharp. Ava was already ahead of her, taking the lead as they sprinted toward the exit. They reached the service door, the one that led outside. Tasha's breath was coming in ragged gasps, but they couldn't stop now. They were so close. Ava yanked the door open, but as they stepped outside, a sharp, bright light blinded them. Tasha barely had time to react before a familiar voice called out to her from the shadows. You're not getting away that easily. Tasha's heart sank. The trap had been set, and they were running right into it. The air outside felt different, cooler, fresher, but Tasha didn't have the luxury of taking a breath. The familiar voice that had called out to them from the shadows sent a wave of dread washing over her. They were trapped, and the escape they'd fought for had just slipped further from their reach. The figure stepped forward from the shadows, illuminated by the dim glow of the security lights. A tall man, dark hair, wearing a tactical vest. Walker. What? The hell, Walker? Tasha's voice was tight with disbelief. You were supposed to be the distraction. Why are you here? Ava, equally confused, raised her weapon but didn't fire. Instead, she spoke with a controlled, steady tone. This isn't funny. We need to go now. Walker's expression was unreadable as he slowly approached them, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. I know this looks bad, but trust me, this isn't what you think. Tasha's blood ran cold. The trap had been sprung. And it wasn't just Delaney's men closing in, it was Walker. He had been working against them all along. You led them to us, Tasha hissed, stepping forward, her gun trained on him. You've been playing us from the start. Walker held his ground, unflinching. You don't understand, Tasha. This whole mission, it's bigger than you think. Delaney's network goes deeper than just corruption. He's not the only one pulling the strings. Tasha's mind raced. Delaney had been the target from the beginning, but if Walker was telling the truth, then they were up against something far more dangerous than they'd realized. What are you talking about? Ava demanded. What's bigger than Delaney? Who's pulling the strings? Walker didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked behind them, and Tasha could hear the distant sound of footsteps growing louder. They didn't have much time. Listen, you need to come with me, Walker said, his voice urgent. There's a larger operation at play, and Delaney is just a pawn in the game. You've been chasing the wrong target. We've been set up from the start. Tasha didn't lower her weapon. Set up? You've been feeding us false intel the entire time. She was struggling to keep her voice steady, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Walker's face darkened. I didn't have a choice, but you don't have much of a choice either. Delaney is going to destroy everything if we don't stop him, and the only way we stop him is by working together. Tasha's thoughts were clouded with doubt. Had Walker really been playing them all this time? Or was he telling the truth now? Behind them, the sound of the guards' boots grew louder. They didn't have time to debate. We don't trust you, Walker, Tasha said coldly, her gun still pointed at him. But if you're right, if you really want to stop Delaney, you'd better prove it. Now. For a long moment, Walker didn't speak. Then, with a resigned sigh, he pulled something from his jacket, a small black device. He tossed it to Tasha. This is the key to taking Delaney down for good, Walker said. It's encrypted, but I can break it down for you later. For now, we need to move. Quickly. Tasha caught the device and inspected it, her instincts, screaming that this was too easy. But she didn't have much of a choice. If Delaney's network was as vast as Walker suggested, they needed to act fast. We don't have much time, she muttered, looking at Ava. Let's move. The three of them turned toward the alley behind the mansion. The guards were closing in, their figures silhouetted in the dim light of the security lamps. The only way out was forward, but it wouldn't be easy. Tasha led the way, moving quickly, her senses sharp. Ava was right behind her, the sound of her boots echoing softly. Walker stayed a few paces behind, but Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She didn't trust him, not yet. Not completely. They moved through the alley, crouching low to avoid being seen. The security lights flickered in and out, casting an eerie glow across the landscape. It was only a matter of time before the guards found them. Where are we going? Ava asked, keeping her voice low. There's a safe house nearby. Walker replied, his tone clipped. We'll lay low for a while, figure out what to do next. But we need to get out of here first. Tasha's eyes flicked toward him, suspicious. And why should we trust you? Walker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned to the corner of the alley where a black SUV was parked. Because I'm the one who can get you out of here alive. They reached the SUV, and Walker quickly ushered them inside. Tasha slid into the back seat, keeping her gun in hand, her eyes scanning every inch of the street. Ava took the front passenger seat, her nerves as taut as a bowstring. As Walker started the engine and pulled away, Tasha leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "We're not in the clear yet. You'd better start explaining what's really going on, Walker." He didn't respond right away, his eyes on the road. The sound of the engine was the only noise for a few moments, and then, finally, he spoke. "You were right to distrust me," he said quietly. "But Delaney wasn't the real target. I've been trying to stop something far worse, something far more dangerous, and we don't have much time to do it." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. This was far from over. The road stretched ahead of them, and with each passing second, the feeling that they were being drawn into something much darker, much larger, grew stronger. Whatever Walker was hiding, it was clear now that they were in deeper than ever before, and the only way out was to keep going. The SUV sped through the empty streets, its headlights cutting through the night like a blade. Tasha stared out the window, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure if she was more furious or more confused. Walker's cryptic explanation hadn't done anything to ease her tension. If anything, it had made her more suspicious. Ava shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, her eyes darting back and forth between Walker and Tasha. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but closed it again, unsure of how to voice the questions that both of them were thinking. Finally, Tasha broke the silence. "All right, Walker, let's get one thing straight." Her voice was sharp, but controlled. "We're still not trusting you completely. You've been playing both sides, and now you expect us to just walk into whatever it is you're planning? How can we be sure you're not leading us into another trap?" Walker's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he kept his eyes on the road, his face impassive. "I get it, Tasha. You've got every right to be pissed at me. But this is bigger than all of us. This whole thing, Delaney, the people behind him, they're only a small part of what's coming." Tasha frowned, her grip on her gun tightening instinctively. "You're still not telling us everything." "And I'm not going to," Walker said, a slight edge to his voice now. "There's a reason you're not hearing all the details. If I told you everything, it would put you at risk. And right now, you're better off not knowing, trust me. The less you know, the better." Tasha leaned back, exhaling slowly. She didn't like it. She didn't like it one bit. But Walker had been right about one thing. This mission had already gone way past Delaney and his little empire, and if there was one thing Tasha had learned in all her years as a Navy SEAL, it was that trusting the wrong person could get you killed. But sometimes trusting the right person could get you killed too. Ava finally spoke up, her voice low but firm. "So who exactly are we up against now, Walker? If it's not Delaney, then who?" For a moment, Walker was silent, his jaw clenched, and Tasha could see the muscles in his neck tightening. Whatever answer he was about to give, she knew it wouldn't be easy. They call themselves the Network. Walker's voice was quiet, almost as though he was speaking more to himself than to them. Delaney was just a pawn. He was always meant to be the distraction. He's the one everyone sees, but the real players stay in the shadows. Tasha's eyes narrowed. "The Network? Who the hell are they?" Walker glanced at her briefly, his expression hard to read. "A group of high-ranking officials, military officers, politicians and businessmen, people with power, real power. They've been controlling everything from behind the scenes for decades, the kind of power you can't touch. And I've been trying to expose them, but I've had to work from the inside where they can't see me coming." Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "You've been undercover," Walker nodded, "for years, and now things are coming to a head. Delaney was only the tip of the iceberg, but now, with him gone, the Network is scrambling. They're going to do whatever it takes to protect their interests. That means anyone who knows too much, including me, becomes a target." Tasha's mind raced, trying to piece together the information. "So you've been using us to take down Delaney. But now that he's gone, you're asking us to take down an even bigger organization." "Exactly." Walker's voice was grim. "And if we don't, they'll burn this country down to protect themselves. You've seen the corruption. They've been controlling everything, from the justice system to the highest levels of military and government. If they succeed, everything you've fought for, everything you've believed in will be gone. It won't just be me they'll be hunting down. It'll be you, too." Tasha fell silent, her mind processing the weight of his words. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, the idea of this vast, untouchable network of power, or the fact that Walker had known about it for years and kept her in the dark. But there was no time for second-guessing. They were in this now, whether they liked it or not. "So what's the plan?" she asked, her tone hard and determined. "How do we take them down?" Walker's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then to the road ahead. "We start with the intel." He gestured to the small device Tasha was holding, the one he had given her earlier. "It's encrypted, but I have the code to break it. Once I do, we'll have everything we need to expose the network. We need to go somewhere safe, lay low until we can get it decrypted. But after that, it's game on. We don't stop until they're all exposed, every last one of them." Tasha didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of fight. They were up against something far larger than she had ever imagined. But the thought of letting these people, these faceless, powerful figures, continue their control over everything made her blood boil. "Where do we go to lay low?" she finally asked. "I have a safe house," Walker said. "I've used it before. It's off the grid. No one will find us there. But once we're in, we'll need to stay off the radar. If the network finds out what we're doing, they won't hesitate to burn this whole city down to stop us." Ava spoke again, her voice filled with doubt. "How do we know you're not leading us straight into their hands?" Walker met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Because if I was, I'd already be gone. You'd never see me coming." He paused. "And if I wanted to kill you, I would have done it already." Tasha stared at him for a long moment, weighing his words. There was something in his eyes, something she couldn't ignore, a sense of urgency, of fear, but also a quiet confidence. It didn't matter what they had been through together, or what they didn't know. They had a job to do now, and the only way out was through. "All right," she said finally. "Let's go." The SUV's tires hummed against the asphalt as they sped toward the unknown. The night was still, but Tasha knew that things were about to get much, much worse before they got better. They had no idea what kind of enemies they were really up against, but one thing was certain: the game had just changed. And now they were playing for their lives. The SUV rumbled down the desolate highway, the night stretching endlessly ahead. Tasha's grip tightened on the small black device in her hand, the weight of their mission settling heavily in her chest. It felt surreal. They were about to infiltrate the very heart of corruption, an insidious network that controlled everything from government to military. And, if Walker was to be believed, they were the last line of defense. Ava was uncharacteristically quiet beside her, her eyes scanning the horizon. Tasha could feel the tension in the air, both between them and Walker and between the three of them. Trust had been shattered, and now they were all forced to move forward with the little they had left. "So, what now?" Ava asked, her voice low but filled with the heavy question that had been hanging over them. "Once we get this intel decrypted, what happens? What's the plan?" Walker glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his face set with an unreadable expression. "We expose them, every last one. We get the names, the locations, everything." Tasha's mind was racing. "How do you plan to get this decrypted?" "That device is encrypted, right? Do you even know how to crack it?" Walker's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment he looked almost pained. "I've got the code to decrypt it, but it's not going to be easy. I'll need a secure connection and time. Lots of time. The kind of time we don't have right now." Tasha was still suspicious, but the urgency in Walker's voice struck a chord with her. Whatever this was, it was bigger than anything they'd dealt with before, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was no turning back. "So, we're just waiting for the right moment?" Ava asked, her skepticism clear. "Pretty much," Walker said. "But we're not exactly waiting idly. We need to stay off the radar. The moment they realize we have the intel, they'll come for us. That's when things get tricky." Tasha nodded grimly, still processing everything. Her gut told her that they couldn't just hide and wait for the network to make their move. If Walker was right, this wasn't just about cracking a code. This was a full-scale war, one that couldn't be won by playing defense. "We need to go on the offensive," Tasha said suddenly, her voice filled with conviction. Walker turned sharply, eyes locking with hers in the rearview mirror. "What are you talking about? We can't sit in some safe house while the network gets ready to strike. We need to take the fight to them. If we give them enough time, they'll take us down before we even get a chance to use that intel." Ava glanced at Tasha, then back to Walker. "She's right. We need to push back, not wait to be ambushed." Walker's hands tightened on the wheel, but he didn't immediately respond. Tasha could see the conflict in his eyes, the hesitation that had plagued him from the beginning. But if they were going to get through this, they needed to act fast. "All right," Walker said finally, his voice taut. "I'll give you a couple of hours to set up, but if we're going to expose them, we need to be smart about it. I'll give you everything I know, but we'll need to move fast. The longer we stay in one place, the more dangerous it becomes." Tasha nodded. "We don't have time to waste." The SUV rumbled down the highway, the tension palpable in the enclosed space. By the time they reached the safe house, the first hint of dawn was just beginning to break over the horizon. The small, nondescript building nestled in the middle of a secluded area, an old farmhouse isolated enough to keep them hidden for a while. Walker led them inside, his eyes scanning the surroundings before locking the door behind them. The house was sparse, barely furnished, but there was a certain coldness to it that made Tasha uneasy. It felt like a place built for one thing: survival. Walker set up a small laptop on the worn kitchen table and plugged the black device into it. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he worked to decrypt the file. Tasha and Ava sat at opposite ends of the table, watching him closely. "How long is this going to take?" Tasha asked, her impatience starting to creep into her voice. "Not long," Walker replied, not looking up from the screen. "The file is layered with encryption, but I've cracked more complicated ones in less time." Tasha wasn't entirely convinced, but there was little else they could do. They had to hope that Walker's skills were as good as he claimed. Ava finally broke the silence, her voice soft. "So you've been in this for years, with the network. How do we know we can trust you now?" Walker's fingers slowed and his eyes flickered to her for a moment. There was a weariness in his gaze that Tasha hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion from their mission. There was something deeper there, something that spoke of guilt, of long nights spent questioning loyalties. "You don't," he said quietly. "You never can trust someone completely. But I'm not asking for your trust, I'm asking for your help. If we're going to stop the network, we need to work together. Otherwise, we're all dead." Tasha met Ava's gaze across the table. She could see the hesitation in her eyes, but also the understanding. They were in this together now, whether they liked it or not. "All right," Ava said, breaking the silence. "What's the next move after we get the intel?" Walker's fingers flew over the keyboard again, his eyes focused as the decryption process continued. He didn't look up this time, but his voice was steady. "Once we have the intel, we start dismantling their operation. We need to hit them fast and hard, expose their network, shut down their key players. But we'll need to be smart. One wrong move and we're done." The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the soft hum of the computer. Tasha's thoughts raced, but she knew they had no other choice. This was the only way to stop the network before it destroyed everything they'd fought for. After what felt like hours, the decryption finally finished. Walker sat back in his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. This is worse than I thought," he muttered under his breath. Tasha leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. The intel was more than they had bargained for. Names, locations, encrypted communications that tied people in power across the globe. It was a web of corruption so vast it threatened to engulf everything. "This is it," Tasha said, her voice firm with resolve. "We can't waste any more time. Let's bring them down." Walker nodded grimly, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "It's not going to be easy, but we have to try." The road ahead was treacherous, and they knew it. But, for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt a sense of clarity. They had the tools, the intel, and the determination to take down the network. But the real battle was only just beginning, and this time, they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of this invisible empire. The sun was now fully up, its rays cutting through the dusty blinds of the safe house like daggers. The quiet of the morning felt deceivingly peaceful, compared to the storm brewing in their hearts. Tasha paced back and forth in the small, sparse living room, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. She could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. Ava stood by the window, peering out, her posture tense. "We can't just walk in and hope for the best, Walker," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "This isn't just some gang or cartel. These people are everywhere, every institution, every high-level power you can imagine. We're talking about some of the most dangerous people on the planet." Walker, sitting at the kitchen table, was scrolling through the decrypted intel on his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up as he replied, his tone steady but grim. "I know, Ava, but we don't have the luxury of time. If we wait any longer, they'll get wind of what we're doing and shut it all down. The longer we stay in the dark, the more innocent people will get hurt. We strike fast and hard." Tasha stopped pacing and turned toward him. "But what's the plan? You can't expect us to just walk in and take them all out. You said it. Yourself, we're up against an army. What's the real move here, Walker?" Walker finally looked up from the screen, his face tired, his eyes hard. "I've been gathering intel on the network for years, but it wasn't until recently that I realized how deep they've buried themselves. They've made their base of operations in plain sight, hiding in the shadow of one of the most powerful corporations in the world. They control everything: politics, business, even law enforcement. This isn't just a mission. It's the fight of our lives." Tasha's mind raced as she processed his words. "And you think we can get to them? Do you have a plan for that?" Walker stood up, pacing now, his hand running through his hair. "The plan is simple. We expose them piece by piece. We've got their names, their locations. We leak it to the press, to trusted journalists, and we make it impossible for them to hide. They think they're untouchable because they control the flow of information. We use their own system against them." Ava frowned, clearly still not sold. "You're talking about taking down an entire network of people. How do we even get close enough to do that? We're talking about moving against people who can destroy our lives in an instant." Tasha stepped forward, her jaw clenched with determination. "We get close by using what we have. We have the intel, we have the element of surprise, and we have each other. It won't be easy, but it's our only shot." Ava glanced at Tasha, then at Walker, who was standing beside the table, staring at the decrypted information with a haunted look in his eyes. He was right. This wasn't just some operation. They weren't taking down some petty criminal syndicate. This was an empire built on blood, lies, and control, and it was their job to bring it all crashing down. "Walker," Tasha said, her voice hard and resolute, "you said we need to move fast. What's the first step?" Walker nodded slowly. "The first step is to get this information into the right hands. We have a contact at a major media outlet who can help us get this out to the world, but we'll need to meet them in person at a secure location. Once we do that, the network will know we're coming, and they'll come for us. We'll be public enemies at that point." Tasha's stomach tightened, but she didn't flinch. "We've been public enemies for a while now, haven't we?" Walker gave a dry laugh, but it wasn't humorous, just weary. "Yeah, I guess we have, but now it's different. If we pull this off, they'll have no choice but to expose themselves." There was a long silence as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. Tasha didn't know if they could succeed. Hell, she wasn't sure if they would survive. But what she did know was that they had no choice. They couldn't let the network continue their stranglehold over everything. They couldn't allow their lives to be dictated by these unseen puppeteers anymore. "When do we leave?" Tasha asked, her voice steely and unwavering. "Now," Walker replied, his tone firm. "We don't have time to waste." The drive to the meeting point was tense, each of them lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the mission bearing down on them. Tasha watched the city pass by through the windows, her mind racing. It was surreal. How had everything come to this? From a simple court case to unraveling a conspiracy of global proportions, the stakes couldn't be higher. As they neared the location, Walker's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face hardening. "It's the contact," he said, his voice low. "We're almost there." They pulled into an unmarked parking lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. The area was dimly lit, the only sound the hum of distant traffic. Walker parked the SUV and turned off the engine. "Stay sharp," he instructed. "We don't know who's watching, but they'll be watching." Tasha's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, checking to make sure it was secure. Ava did. The same, her eyes scanning their surroundings, alert. "We get in, we get out, and we make this information public," Walker said, looking at both of them. "After that, we have to disappear. Once the world knows who these people are, we'll be targets. There's no coming back from this." Tasha nodded. She knew the risks, but they had come too far to back down now. They were already in the fight. And now there was no turning back. They exited the SUV cautiously and moved toward a small, nondescript building on the far side of the lot. As they neared the entrance, the door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, wearing a plain black hoodie. His face was partially obscured by a cap, but there was no mistaking the grim look in his eyes. "You're late," the man said, his voice rough. "We had to make sure we weren't being followed," Walker replied tersely. The man nodded and handed him a small briefcase. "The files are encrypted. You'll need to decode them yourself." Tasha took a step forward, feeling the weight of the briefcase in her hands. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. Before she could say anything, Walker nodded sharply. "Get the information out there. The world needs to know. Who's pulling the strings?" They exchanged a few more words with the contact, but Tasha could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart. The moment had arrived. They had the power to take down the network, to expose the corruption that had poisoned every corner of their world. As they drove back, the weight of what they had done, what they were about to do, pressed on them with growing intensity. The plan was set in motion. The world would know the truth. But as they neared the safe house, Tasha felt a chill settle in her bones. Something was wrong. They were being watched. A flash of movement in the rearview mirror caught her eye. "We are not alone," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. Walker's hand instinctively went to the gun holstered at his side. "Get ready," he said, his voice sharp. "They're coming." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?